Hello. Hello. Hey, Bill. Hello. Ane jua kali. An mochwalore matin. Eh. Idwa bolo gimoro. Keta kata kaw go mama to ago maero kamano. Nyako mane? Aya.
As the court's jurisdiction flows from the relief sought by a party, it was submitted further that this court should strike out the fifth respondent's participation from the petition and that the petition against the fifth respondent be dismissed with costs. I will consider the arguments by both the petitioners and the fifth respondent on this issue. Article 48 of the Constitution guarantees from the relief sought by a party justice. It was submitted in addition as Article 51 the fifth respondent's participation from the petition and that the petition against the fifth by the application of law decided in a fair and public hearing before a court. I will consider the arguments by both the petitioners and the fifth respondent on casino or body. Article 8 of the Constitution is that no regulation against justice. It was submitted in addition as Article 51 the fifth respondent's participation from against the petition and that the petition against the fifth by the application of law decided in a fair and public hearing before a court. I will consider the arguments by both the petitioners and the expansion of casino or body. Article 8 the returning officer, C, the commission, and D, any other person whose conduct is complained of in regard to a petition. The examination of the petition herein reveals that the petitioner's hearing level specific allegations against the fifth respondent are set out herein above. C. The specific declarations are also sought against the fifth respondent. Any other person who shall not be complained in regard to a petition. The fifth respondent, in a bid to debunk those allegations of the petition, herein reveals that the petitioner's hearing also finds specific allegations against the fifth respondent as set out herein above. C. The specific declarations are also sought against the fifth respondent. Any other person who shall not be complained in regard to a petition accorded fair play in the fifth respondent, in a bid to debunk those allegations of the petition, herein reveals that the petitioner's hearing also finds specific allegations against the fifth respondent as set out herein above. C. The specific declarations are also sought in concert with the third respondent. The petitioners also as having made intemperate, corrective, and potentially insightful remarks against anyone opposing the candidacy of the third respondent. Petitioners in concert with the third respondent. The fifth respondent. The petitioners also have stated in paragraphs H as having made intemperate or corrective and potentially insightful clear that the petitioners raised anyone with the fifth respondent's conduct during and after the election petition cycle in the gubernatorial elections in Homa Bay with the allegations raised against the fifth petitioners also have stated in paragraphs in this petition may consider terrorists or corrective and potentially insightful the anyone with the fifth respondent's conduct and during and after the election, the description and definition of a respondent gubernatorial elections in Homa Bay the allegations raised against the fifth petitioners also restricted in paragraphs in this petition may consider whether a free and fair ODM party nomination process, he would have trounced his opponents and clinched the fifth respondent's party ticket, and that since he was denied a ticket to vie for governor through the ODM party, he resigned from the said party and opted to vie as an independent candidate. The petitioners further pleaded that the third respondent and the leadership of the fifth respondent ODM party, knowing how popular the petitioner had become amongst the people of Homa Bay, were not happy with his decision to run as an independent candidate, and that they therefore resorted to campaigns characterized by premeditated and widespread violence against him and his supporters, and that they further enlisted the support and influence of the fifth respondent's party leader, the former Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga, who campaigned for the third respondent and made a running call that the Homa Bay County voters should only elect the fifth respondent's ODM party nominee candidates. In his sworn testimony, the first petitioner, who testified as PW14, stated that the fifth respondent unilaterally and clandestinely issued a direct ticket to the third respondent despite the fact that the first petitioner had paid nomination fees and thus expected him to slug it out with the third respondent and other candidates for the party ticket on a universal suffrage during the general election. The first petitioner further testified that as a result of the botched nomination of the third respondent as the fifth respondent's flag bearer for the governor's position, the fifth respondent, in complicity with the third respondent, engaged in a campaign of violence, voter intimidation, bribery, and undue influence that led to the impugned result of Homa Bay gubernatorial elections. PW6 John Ogina Nyabona testified for the petitioner and stated that he was the chairman of the fifth respondent, that is ODM party, in Diwa sub-county. He testified that the opaque activities of the ODM party led to the issuance of a direct nomination ticket to the third respondent, Honorable Gladys Wanga. It was his testimony that after each candidate had paid the nomination fees, the ODM party came up with its own candidate through a direct ticket which was not right, and that the people of Diwa felt that they had lost. He testified that the ODM party imposed on them a candidate whom they did not agree with, and so they all left the party, and that in protest, they did not vote for the third respondent. In their written submissions, the petitioners asserted that the acts, errors, or omissions during the fifth respondent's nomination process so affected the impugned election to the extent that the said elections were rendered unconstitutional and invalid. It was their submission that the antecedent acts set the stage for a very toxic and violent atmosphere, and that it therefore came as no surprise when violence broke out in a coordinated manner right across the county in the period leading to on the 14th day of 9th of August, the year 2022. The petitioners further submitted that there was no nomination dispute between the petitioners and the fifth respondent, and that they had simply provided context to the violence and intimidation that was eventually meted out on them and their supporters by the third and fifth respondents on the day of election, that is the 9th August 2022. In response to the above assertions by the petitioners, the first and second respondents contended that the issues raised by the petitioners in paragraphs 85 to 106 of the petition were pre-election disputes, and that the law provided for the resolution by the third and fifth respondents, the Political Parties Act and the Elections Act. The first and second respondents further stated that the first respondent, IEBC, was also an arbiter of election disputes, but that the petitioner never lodged any complaint of a pre-election dispute with them. It was their contention that this court would therefore not entertain a dispute whose resolution channel was established in law, as this would fly in the face of the doctrine of exhaustion. The first and second respondents called DW1, who tested was not the appropriate avenue to address pre-election disputes, and further that the petitioners never lodged any complaint or pre-election dispute with the IEBC for resolution. On their part, the third and fourth DW1, who tested, contended that neither the petitioners not the appropriate avenue to address nor members of the OS pre-election disputes, and further that the petitioners never lodged any complaint invoked the party dispute with the IEBC party or to reach out to the first petitioner. On their part, the third and fourth DW1 The first petitioner failed to attend the consensus meeting, which was convened by the ODM party top leadership to determine the candidates to run for the governor's position in Homa Bay. It was his displeasure, then nomination would have been carried out by universal suffrage. The fifth respondent, on his part, called GW15, who testified that the ODM party conducted its nomination of candidates in accordance with the law, the party constitution, and the nomination rules. GW15 further testified that despite the party having many mechanisms for settling disputes, the fifth respondent, and that they were simply creating a nexus between the botched nomination and the subsequent malpractices of violence, intimidation, undue influence, and corruption that were experienced during the June Homa Bay gubernatorial elections. The petitioners did not call and witness to testify and prove that indeed, as a result of the alleged bungled ODM nominations, the would-be voters were barred from voting in the gubernatorial elections, or that they were exposed to violence that prevented them from voting. There was also no evidence adduced by the petitioners to support the allegation that the aforementioned alleged malpractices resulted from what the petitioners termed as bungled nominations. To the contrary, the first petitioner and PW6, John Ogina Nyaboda, testified that after the nomination of the third respondent as the candidate for the fifth respondent in Homa Bay County, the first petitioner and PW6, together with their supporters, decided to leave the membership of the fifth respondent, the ODM party, and subsequently the first petitioner died as an I have no doubt in my mind that the petitioners know and believe that by this court interrogating this alleged nexus, in parentheses, the court will be called upon to examine details of the alleged bungled nomination process. My finding on this issue is that the petitioners, having clearly pleaded, blaming the fifth respondent for failure to conduct the nomination process in accordance with the law, cannot therefore turn around and adduce fresh evidence in their submissions that the nomination process as pleaded in their petition from paragraphs 85 up to 105 of the petition was only meant to lay a foundation for the subsequent alleged malpractices and illegalities experienced during the election, which this court shall without doubt address. I am satisfied that what the petitioners are calling upon this court as an election court do is to determine the merit and the merits of the dispute arising from the ODM party primaries nomination process, which the petitioners claim was bungled, and that their loss in the party primaries is responsible for their loss in the main elections when they vie on an independent ticket. The question as to whether an election court has jurisdiction to determine pre-election dispute parties in Kenya must have internal dispute resolution mechanisms. Each political party mechanisms which must be resorted to as a first port of call before the dispute is escalated to the IEBC, Political Parties Liaison Committee, that is as set out in Section 38 of the Political Parties Act, or to the Political Party Disputes Tribunal as established under Section 39 of the Political Parties Act. And I have cited or quoted Professor Tom Wajenda, Senior Counsel, and Lydia Mwalimu Adude's writing on electoral dispute resolution mechanisms in Kenya, 2022, Journal of CFSD, Volume 8, 3, where the two writers aptly puts it as follows, that, and I quote, electoral dispute resolution, EDR, is the hallmark of any electoral system and process that is built to further democracy and the principle of free and fair elections. Electoral disputes can occur pre-election or post-election, thus giving rise to the need for both pre-election EDR mechanisms and post-election EDR mechanisms. EDR mechanisms in Kenya are provided for under the Constitution of Kenya 2010, the electoral statutes and regulations, and political party documents such as political party constitutions, nominations and primaries rules, and coalition agreements. The electoral laws, as well as the electoral laws. EDR mechanisms are administrative and quasi-judicial, especially as pertains to intra-party rules and coalition agreements, as well as judicial, mostly as concerns post-election disputes. End of quote. Electoral laws of the writings. As well as the electoral laws. In the election disputes, the section requires political parties to resolve any disputes arising from party nominations within 30 days after the date of the party nominations. After exhausting a political party's internal dispute resolution mechanisms, an aggrieved party can seek recourse in the quasi-judicial EDR mechanisms. Section 40 of the Political Parties Act. So the end of quote of that part of the acknowledgement by the two writers. Section 40 of the Political Parties Act provides for the jurisdiction of the Political Parties Dispute Tribunal, and I have reproduced that section. I need not read it. However, there is a rider under 40 subsection 2 of the said Act, that is the Political Parties Act, which reads as follows, and I read. Section 40, 2, that notwithstanding subsection 1, the tribunal shall not hear or determine a dispute under paragraph A, B, C, or E, unless the dispute has been heard and determined by the internal dispute party, the internal political party dispute resolution mechanisms. From the above section, party nomination. The Political Parties Act mandates each political party to have its constitution, internal dispute resolution mechanisms, to have in its constitution internal dispute resolution mechanisms, which must be resorted to before the tribunal is approached with a dispute that falls within section 40 subsection 1A up to F. Above. It is the Parties Act. So I will just repeat. Section 41 of the Political Parties Act provides for the resolution of political parties disputes. In addition, Part 7, that is Roman 7, sections 74 to 87 of the Elections Act 2011 specifically dedicates provisions on election disputes resolution. The said Act provides for settlement of the election and post-election disputes. First is that Section 74(1) of the Elections Act acknowledges the constitutional and statutory mandate of IEBC under Article 88, Sub-Article 4E of the Constitution and Section 4E of the IEBC Act 2011 to settle pre-election disputes, including disputes relating to or arising from nomination. However, IEBC has no mandate to settle election petitions and disputes subsequent to the declaration of the election results. Election disputes brought before the IEBC are to be determined within 10 days of being lodged with the Commission. However, where such a dispute relates to a prospective nomination or election, the dispute is to be determined before the date of nomination or election as appropriate. As regards post-election petitions, the Elections Act 2011 entails procedures for settlement of disputes in relation to the various elective posts in respect of parliamentary and county elections. Section 75 of the Elections Act 2011 is particular on county election petitions. A dispute as to the validity of an election of a county governor is to be heard and determined by the High Court within the county or nearest the county. The High Court is to hear and determine the matter within 6 months of the date of lodging the petition. And this is what this court is doing today. Article 88, Sub-Article 4E of the Constitution mandates that the IEBC shall inter alia be responsible for the settlement of electoral disputes relating to or arising from nominations, but excluding election petitions and disputes subsequent to the declaration of election results. The Supreme Court has since clarified the law on the election court's mandate over pre-election disputes in 3 cases that turned out this issue. In Sami Ndumu Waiti versus IEBC and 3 others, the 2018 Supreme Court petition number 33, the Supreme Court established several principles to guide the courts. And because this is quite lengthy, I will not read, the parties will read for themselves. I have quoted extensively, and also in the case of Silvas Lisamula Anani versus IEBC, the Supreme Court also in petition number 30 of 2018 also made the same pronouncement referring to the provisions of Articles 88, 4E, and 105, 1 and 3 of the Constitution, and also Article 165, Sub-Article 3 of the Constitution, on the High Court sitting as a judicial review court or in exercise of its supervisory jurisdiction under that article. Again, I have cited that, I don't have to read. The 2 decisions cited above were later applied in the case of Mohammed Abdi Mohamud versus Ahmed Abdullahi Mohammed and 3 others, 2019 EKLR, where the Supreme Court again held that pre-election disputes were a reserve of the IEBC or the court acting in judicial review or exercising its supervisory jurisdiction. From the above judicial pronouncements by the Apex Court, whose decisions bind this court, and of course supported by the constitutional and statutory provisions, it is undeniable that the disputes relating to nominations or eligibility to be nominated as candidates in elections go to the root of an election. However, as observed elsewhere in this judgment, this fact does not confer jurisdiction on an election court, as this court is to hear and determine nomination-related disputes, precisely because these disputes are reserved the IEBC under Article 884E of the Constitution, or the Political Parties Tribunal, or the respective parties' internal dispute resolution mechanisms, or the High Court exercising judicial review jurisdiction, depending on the matter that is at hand. It follows that an election court ought not to trample upon the electoral process by a colossus in the face of clear and unambiguous provisions of the law regarding its jurisdiction. Where the Constitution or the law consciously confers jurisdiction to resolve a dispute on an organ other than a court of law, it is imperative that such dispute resolution mechanism must be exhausted through those alternative means as acknowledged in Article 159, Number the court. But if not so, then parties would overlook the recognized fora and later spring complaints at courts. Such a scenario would be a clear recipe for forum shopping and an undertaking that must never be allowed fester in the administration of justice. The Supreme Court, in the subsequent cases in addressing this question of the forum for resolving pre-election disputes, relied on and accepted the persuasive. So with all the above in mind, I find that in the instant petition, the petitioners did not first adduce evidence to prove that the pre-election issues detailed in the petition from paragraphs 85 up to 105 affected the outcome of the gubernatorial elections in Homa Bay, and as earlier noted, none of the witnesses called by the petitioners testified that they were prevented from voting as a result of the alleged bungled nomination, or that they were exposed to violence during nominations such that they were prevented from voting for the petitioners. I also find that there is no nexus between the alleged bungled nominations as pleaded by the petitioners and to do so would then be calling upon this court to determine the merits of the nomination process. It follows, therefore, that the petitioners ought to have pursued the available dispute resolution mechanisms to resolve the alleged bungled ODM nomination process as stipulated in law, instead of originating their grievances at this election court. I hasten to add that the first petitioner testified that he resigned from membership of the fifth respondent ODM party and elected to vie as an independent candidate. He is therefore stopped from using the fifth respondent's nomination process as a springboard upon which he can lay a foundation to bring his petition against the fifth respondent. Again, I find that this court is bereft of jurisdiction to hear and determine pre-election nomination issues raised by the first petitioner, and that the petitioners have not proved that the pre-election issues which arose during the ODM party primaries nomination process affected the Homa Bay gubernatorial election results of 9 August 2022. The next issue is whether there were instances of vote padding and ballot stuffing in the Homa Bay gubernatorial elections, and whether that vote padding and ballot stuffing affected the results of the said elections which are impugned herein. The petitioners pleaded in the centers in the constituencies of Kasipul, Brangwell, Suba South, Kabondo, Kasipul, Diwa, Suba North, and Homa Bay Town. Through the testimony of PW11, Ahmed Obiambo, the petitioner stated that in Rungu polling station, the results were changed on Form 37B with the Buddhist votes switched to Gladys Wanga's. Thus, Gladys Wanga ended up with 258 votes, and conversely, Rabudi ended up with 000 votes, quite contrary to the entries made in Form 37A as declared by the presiding officer at Rungu polling station. The petitioners further advised that there was padding as was evident in the differences in the number of votes cast for different elective positions, considering that every voter was handed 6 separate ballot papers in respect of the 6 elective positions. The petitioners further asserted that there were serious and glaring inconsistencies on the number of votes cast and that there were more votes cast than were identified by the King's Kit, implying that there was these votes were inflated, altered, manipulated, or padded as alleged by the petitioners. The first and second respondents further contended that the candidates' agents signed Forms 37A and 37B, which was a confirmation that they were satisfied with the counting and tallying of the election results at the various levels as envisaged in electoral laws, and that the results contained in Form 37As and 37Bs accurately reflected the count of the votes cast in favor of each candidate. It was the case for the first and second respondents that it was human to make some clerical errors, taking into account the working conditions and environment coupled with the political pressures, with a rider that in itself cannot be misconstrued to have been done intentionally so as to favor any candidate. On their part, the third and fourth respondents, called DW6, Salfa Homa, who was stationed as an agent for the third respondent at Rungu polling station, testified that the declared votes at the Rungu polling station were Wanga 258 votes, Rabudi 00 votes, and Kidero 48 votes. But that during signing of the Form 37A, he noticed that the presiding officer had entered the results for Wanga to be for Rabudi and vice versa. So he intervened and the correction was done. According to this witness, no one complained against the correction, including PW11, who agreed that there had indeed been an initial error in the entry of the gubernatorial results in Form 37A. It was submitted on behalf of the third and fourth respondents that the data allegedly gathered from the King's Kits encapsulated voter identification in all 6 elective positions, whereas the ballot box was representative of the votes cast by voters for a specific elective position, only representing the expression of the people's will. The burden of proof lay on the petitioners to prove the allegations of ballot stuffing and vote padding and serious glaring inconsistencies and malpractices. The allegations by the petitioners were criminal in nature, and as such, the standard of proof expected of the petitioners was that of beyond reasonable doubt. This position has already been explained in the first issue of this judgment. From the evidence adduced, PW11 testified of the alleged vote stuffing in favor of the third respondent at Rungu polling station. The respondents score station 1, Wanga 258, Rabudi 00, and Kidero 48. That no one complained against the correction, including PW11, who agreed that there had been an error. PW6 testified that the correction was done according to the declared results and that the results in Form 37C reflected the correct results for the third respondent, which was 258 votes. I observed that in cross-examination, PW11 admitted that the correct results as declared were that the third respondent, that is Honorable Wanga, had 258 votes, Rabudi had 00, and Dr. Kidero had 48 votes. What that clearly means is that the person whose votes had been wrongly exchanged and indicated to be 00, and who would have lost substantially had the interventions and corrections not been done, was the third respondent, Honorable Gladys Wanga, and not the first petitioner hearing. It is therefore surprising that PW11, having agreed to the results at the polling station when the correction was being done, came to court and testified, citing the same as an incident of vote stuffing and ballot padding. Following the scrutiny and recount ordered by this court, the Deputy Registrar who supervised the process found that according to the petitioners and the first respondent, verified voters were persons biometrically identified, while authorized voters were persons alphanumerically identified. Further, she noted that both the petitioners and the first respondent stated that the total number of persons identified biometrically were the persons verified, and that this include persons authorized by the supervisor. Just a moment. The scrutiny report further revealed that in its explanation of variance in the data, the IEBC team explained that the data captured by the KIMS showed all persons who were eventually identified using the KIMS, either alphanumerically or biometrically, but that all the parties were in agreement that the total number of persons identified by KIMS did not include those identified manually. It follows, therefore, that the discrepancies which are apparent can be explained by manually verified voters, as explained by the first and second respondents in the testimony of GW1, who testified that the only situations where there would be a variance between KIMS kit and the votes cast would be where a person spoiled their ballot and was issued with another ballot paper. Secondly, where one marks a ballot paper but places it in the wrong ballot, that is a stray ballot. And thirdly, where the ballot is marked wrongly so, it is rejected. And this is a spoiled ballot. The petitioners also pleaded that counting and tallying that was done by the first and second respondents was marred with illegalities and irregularities, such as unlawful assisted voting. PW7, the petitioner's agent at Akana polling station, testified that at 2 p.m., a voter came in and was given ballot papers, which he marked, and after casting, the voter remained with 3 other ballot papers. However, it was her testimony in cross-examination that the presiding officer took possession of the 3 extra ballot papers and went with them to consult with her fellow presiding officer. In response to that allegation, the first and second respondents pleaded that in cases where the presiding officer was to assist a voter in the compartment, the agents must informal complaint of any irregular or unlawful assistance in voting, and that there was no evidence that anybody was forced to vote for any particular candidate in the process of being assisted. They did not state how many voters were involved to enable the court assess the magnitude and effect on the final results. The third and fourth respondents pleaded that the allegation of assisted voters being assisted in favor of the third respondent, the third respondent lacked in specificity, and that in any case, any voter or voters that were assisted were lawfully assisted in the presence of all available agents and none had been called as a witness to. Under that regulation, there is a procedure for dealing with voters who require assistance to vote. A reading of the same regulation shows that the preferred method for assisting an illiterate voter or one with a disability to vote is for the voter to go to the polling station with a person of their own choice. In such a situation, the voter marks and casts their vote with the assistance of a person that the voter has selected and trusts. However, where the voter is not accompanied by a person who is qualified to assist the voter, then the presiding officer shall assist such a voter in the presence of the agents. I have perused the evidence presented by the petitioners, the evidence of PW7 regarding a voter who remained with 3 ballot papers after voting did not relate to unlawful assisted voting as testified by PW7, the said extra ballots were taken away by the presiding officer and not cast in favor of any candidate. There was no evidence laid before this court by the petitioners of unlawful assisted voting, which could be interpreted to have been intended to favor the third and fourth respondents. It was incumbent upon the petitioners to prove to the satisfaction of the court that there was vote padding and ballot stuffing that eventually affected the results of the gubernatorial elections in Homa Bay County. I find no evidence was adduced to prove these serious allegations. I therefore find no merit and substance in these allegations against the first, second, third, and fourth respondents. No allegation was made against the fifth respondent concerning vote padding and ballot stuffing. The next issue is whether there were alterations and cancellations on the statutory electoral forms and whether the cancellations and alterations, if any, affected the results of the June election. The petitioners pleaded in their petition that there were a number of alterations in Form 37 and contrary to the electoral laws, and that the alterations were not countersigned by the various presiding officers of particular polling stations, and finally that the alterations complained of were made in favor of the third respondent to give an unfair advantage. The petitioners cited the case of Ruruku Primary School polling station number 2, where they alleged that all agents were asked to sign a blank Form 37A before the recording of the respective valid votes cast in favor of each of the competing candidates as declared by the presiding officer was done, and that the results were changed on Form 37B with Ramudi's votes being switched to the third respondents, and the third respondent ended up with 258 votes, and conversely, Rabudi ended up with 00 votes. quite contrary to the entries in the Form 37A as declared by the presiding officer at Rungu Polling Station. The petitioners in paragraph 177 of the petition also provided a list of 30 polling stations where they allege that Form 37A were altered. The polling stations, the 30 polling stations, I have enumerated them here. They start with Kome Primary School and they end with Kawiti Primary School 1 of 1. So there are 30. I have listed them here. I don't have to read them all. Read for yourselves. I've only extracted from that paragraph 177, the petition. In support of those assertions, the petitioners relied on the testimony of PW11, who was their agent at Rungu Primary School polling station, and who testified that everything went on well on election day from morning till 11 p.m. when they were told to sign an empty Form 37A before the cast votes were indicated therein. PW11 testified that he later realized that there was an error on the form, specifically that votes were not being placed, but that the votes assigned to the first petitioner were correct. PW11 also testified that Dr. Evans Kidero had 048 votes, Charles Rabud had 000 votes, and Honorable Gladys Wanga had 258 votes. But that in Form 37A, it was indicated that Wanga had 000 votes, Rabudi had 258 votes, and Dr. Evans Kidero had 048 votes. PW12, the petitioner's chief agent for Kasipur Kabondo sub-county, testified that he saw the discrepancy in Form 37A from Rungu polling station as said by his agent, and that what was being announced being different from PW1, and all of that, Ojijo, who was the presiding officer at Ongeti Primary School polling station, and who testified that he was forced to fill in the wrong results in Form 37A in favor of the third respondent at gunpoint. He, however, testified that when he managed to go to the tallying center, he filled in another Form 34A with the correct results that showed that the third respondent, Honorable Gladys Wanga, had 235 votes, while Dr. Evans Kidero had 115 votes. In response to the above assertion, the first and second respondents stated that and tuning of votes was done in a transparent manner as verified by the agents, and that no candidates' votes were inflated, altered, manipulated, or funded as alleged by the petitioner, and that the candidates' agents signed Form 37 to make some clerical errors taking into consideration the working conditions and environment, but that cannot be construed to have been done intentionally so as to favor any candidate, and that no agent was refused or denied an opportunity to verify and or authenticate the alterations that were made and which were apparent. PW1, Mr. Frederick Apopa, the county returning officer for Homa Bay, in these impugned elections, testified that an examination of the alleged alterations to the forms complete. It was DW1's testimony that a presiding officer is allowed to make corrections on a form to ensure completeness of the documentation. For example, that if certain entries are not correct or as agents bring to his attention, or if the form is not duly stamped or not fully signed, the presiding officers ensure completeness of the documents. DW2, Lawrence Okumu Barasa, the returning officer for Rangwe constituency, testified that he only received a form or systemic and that they were mostly summations or entry errors that were countersigned by the presiding officers and also signed by the candidates' agents. On behalf of the 4th, 3rd, and 4th respondents, DW6 testified that the alterations to Form 37A at Rungu polling station was done at the polling station after we noticed that there was an error in the votes awarded to the 3rd respondent, Honorable Gladys Wanga and Mr. Abudi. He further testified that the alterations were done in the presence of PW11 and all other agents, and that the said alterations reflected the true results as declared at the polling station, and that no agent of post had any issue with the said alterations. The 3rd and 4th respondents submitted that the petitioners failed to demonstrate that there were any major systemic or widespread. It is not in doubt that the petitioners had the duty to not only highlight cancellations and alterations in the Form 37A complaint of, but also show that those cancellations and alterations, when considered in the context of the specific cases, had weight on the credibility of the results contained therein. I have examined Form 37A for Rungu polling station 2 of 2 and note that indeed there were alterations to the same form, specifically on the votes assigned to the 3rd respondent, Honorable Gladys Wanga, and those assigned to Mr. Mark Charles Rabudi. It is evident from the said Form 37A that the initial assigned votes were 000 for Gladys Wanga and 258 for Mark Rabudi. There is then the cancellation and replacement with 000 votes for Mark Charles Rabudi and 258 votes for the 3rd respondent, Honorable Gladys Wanga. The 76 Ongeti Primary School, as produced by the petitioners in evidence at page 13 of the petition, shows that the type Mark Charles Rabudi had 00 votes, while Gladys Achino Wanga had 235 votes. There were no rejected votes. These are the same results which were extracted from Form 37A for Ongeti Primary School polling station. Furthermore, I find that no issue was raised in evidence concerning the total number of votes garnered. Petitioners called 2 witnesses to testify on the alterations of Form 37A out of the 30 Deputy Registrar of this court noted that none of the Form 37As disputed by the petitioners and subsequently scrutinized had any alterations. Thus, the question of their having been altered or cancelled and not having been countersigned Form 37S does not arise. The scrutiny ordered by this court at the behest of the petitioners of the petition, where it was alleged that the Form 37As were altered or cancelled without countersigning, thereby affecting the credibility of the results of elections. The 30 polling stations were out of 1,228 polling stations in Homa Bay County. The deputy registrar altered or passed. The scrutiny report states as follows, and quote verbatim, none of the Form 37S scrutinized had alterations. End of the quote. In essence, there was no evidence adduced by the petitioners to establish that claim instrument a raft of findings and or observations, some of which findings were not borne out of or supported by the primary documents, which are scrutiny checklist forms developed to guide the scrutiny exercise, or what was observed and noted during the scrutiny. The petitioners made their own observations and findings and different scrutiny and recount reports relating to one and the same vote with enumeration and scrutiny exercise and to what record or report then in such circumstances, and therefore I resorted to the judicious course by ordering the conduct of a scrutiny as a model of unraveling any hidden mystery, one out of the pleadings by the petitioners. But the scrutiny, as has been held time and again, is not meant to be a fishing expedition. Can this court then properly resolve the question on the basis of the election data of private origin from the petitioners. That, in my view, would be in vicious, and it's not the lawful mode of resolution of an election dispute. This court, upon receipt of the scrutiny and report and its annexes, what the petitioners call the prime Rahman Ibrahim Mahmoud versus Mohammed Ahmed Koloch and two others, 2018 decision that is pronounced itself as follows, briefly, that it is clear that the process of scrutiny has not pointed to any contestant as a winner. The position is blunt and simply uncertain. The vital place of scrutiny in electoral dispute-related dispute settlement was reiterated yet again in case of Clement Kumu Waibara versus Honorable Annie Wanjiku Kibe, 2018, where the court stated, this is a Supreme Court, stated at paragraph 52 that in view of such considerations, we are in agreement with the appellate court's standpoint that the trial court ought to have ascertained the petitioners pleaded that they had been altered and cancelled without countersigning were found to have no such cancellations or alterations. Even in those that were not pleaded but were raised in court, again the court has made a finding above. It's also not possible for the court to prescribe a uniform finding with respect to the effect of cancellations or alterations in electoral forms, or to draw an inference out of the same. The court can only reach a finding emanating from such cancellations and alterations after examining them surrounding the viewed election results. It was therefore the duty of the petitioners to show to this court how the alterations referred to affected the election results in the highlighted forms. I observe that in this case, the petitioners did not gather the majority votes in the two polling stations that they claimed that alterations took place in favor of the third respondent. And the two, that is Rungu and Ongeti. To be specific, in Rungu Primary School polling station 2 of 2, the first petitioner garnered 80 votes, whereas the third respondent garnered 258 votes. And in Ongeti Primary School polling station, the third respondent garnered 235 votes, while the petitioner garnered 115 votes. The petitioners did not prove that there were other different votes for the first petitioner and the third respondent in those polling stations, and on how the cancellations or alterations in Rungu polling station affected the election results at the said Rungu Primary School polling station or at the Ongeti Primary School polling station. From the evidence adduced, therefore, I find that at Rungu Primary School polling station, where the petitioners claimed that the third respondent was awarded votes that she did not deserve, the cancellation or alteration which was explained to the satisfaction of this court did not in any way point towards a compromise of the results in that Form 37A, which was countersigned, and there was no proof that the first petitioner's words were exchanged with those of the third respondent. Furthermore, as a matter of principle, it's not enough to say that since there were cancellations in electoral forms, the results contained in those forms were by that fact invalid. There must be solid evidence to show that the integrity of those results has been substantially compromised as a result of the proven cancellations or alterations. No such evidence was supplied to this court. I've also referred to the case of Kidero Peter Munya versus Dixon Mwenda Gidinji and two others, where the Supreme Court pronounced itself on this issue and just what part of it. That it's clear to us that an election should be conducted substantially in accordance voting is to be conducted in accordance with the principles set out in Article 86. The Elections Act and the regulations thereunder constitute the substantive and procedural law for the conduct of elections. If it should be shown that an election was conducted substantially in accordance with the principles of the Constitution and Elections Act, then such election is not to be invalidated only on the ground of irregularities. Where, however, it is shown that the irregularities were of such magnitude that they affected the election result, then such an election stands to be invalidated. With some emphasis here that otherwise procedural or administrative irregularities and other errors occasioned by human imperfection are not enough by and of themselves to vitiate an election. Where an election is conducted in such a manner as demonstrably violates the principles of the Constitution and the law, such an election stands to be invalidated. In this petition, I have no reason to depart from the above holding that an election result will not be vitiated merely because of minor irregularities which did not go to the root of or substantially affect the outcome of the election. The evidence adduced in this petition, I find that the alterations and all cancellations proved, which were in respect of the two Rungu polling station, were administrative irregularities and errors occasioned by human imperfection, which are not enough by and of themselves to shape the results of election, which is impugned by this petition. I therefore find that prove the allegations that there were cancellations and or alterations to statutory forms 37 and in the 30 polling stations which affected the election results. The next question is whether there was failure to sign and stamp statutory electoral forms and whether the alleged failure affected the results of the impugned election. The first respondent, that some had not been signed by the presiding officers and that other forms had different signatures, an indication that it was the same presiding officer who purportedly signed, which was suspicious and contrary to 174 of the petition, searching out the specific polling stations where the Form 37As were allegedly either not signed or stamped. In this court's ruling for scrutiny and recount made on 18th November 2022 and reviewed on 26th November 2022, the court allowed scrutiny and recount in 195 polling stations out of the 1,228 polling stations. However, during the actual exercise of scrutiny and recount, only 192 polling stations were found to be available out of the 195 ordered, as some polling stations had been repeated in the list provided by the court and that others were non-existent. In response to the above allegation, the first and second respondents pleaded and testified on and subsequently submitted that whether the statutory Form 37A was stamped or not, this did not in any way affect the credibility of the election process and the final results of the elections now in hearing. DW1, Mr. Frederick Apopa, the IEBC Homa County Returning Officer, and who is also the second respondent in this petition, testified that a presiding officer is allowed to stamp a document to attain completeness of that document. The third and fourth respondents responded by stating that the allegations of non-signing or stamping of statutory forms by presiding officers were fabricated, as the evidence adduced in support of these allegations had been deliberately withheld, or the same Form 37A faintly printed by the petitioners the truth. The third and fourth respondents also submitted that there was no evidence adduced by the petitioners of unsigned or unstamped forms, and that in unstamping of statutory forms by agents could not invalidate an election. Allow me to take a sip of water as we progress. This is your day for listening and talking. I will first deal with the aspect of signing of statutory forms. The importance of signing electoral forms by presiding or returning officers cannot be overemphasized and or understated. It is through signing such forms that the author or maker can authoritatively acquire authentic ownership. In the absence of that, the document shall be deemed to be worthless and ownerless, hence not of any probative value for submission as evidence in a court of law. Recognizing the significant role that Form 37A and 37B play in the electoral process, the Supreme Court in the Ryder 2017 case held at paragraph 377 as follows. Part of that, I quote, that while the returning officer, or for that matter, a presiding officer failed or neglect to append his signature to a document whose contents he or she has deleted, is in the appending of signature to a form bearing the tabulated results, the last solemn act of assurance to the voter by such officer that he stands by the numbers on that form. The Supreme Court posed those two questions. It is therefore clear, as pronounced by the Supreme Court, that failure to sign the requisite statutory forms by a returning officer or presiding officer will render that form worthless, useless, null and void, application for want of authenticity and ownership of election result. Yet again, the onus was on the petitioners in this case to adduce evidence to demonstrate that the Form 37As were not signed or stamped by either the presiding officer or the deputy presiding officer of the respective polling stations. At the time of pre-trial directions, this court observed that the petitioners had filed very faint copies of Form 37S, and I did direct them to file clearer copies, which they did. I further observed that the clearer copies of Form 37S as filed by the petitioners as exhibits after this court noted that the initial forms filed were clear, were all duly stamped and signed by either the presiding officer or the deputy presiding officer. In some instances, the forms had more than one IEBC stamps, and the petitioner's counsel did examine and cross-examine the witnesses on the aspect of why some Form 37As had one stamp while others had two stamps. And I observed that in some instances where there were two stamps, one other stamp appeared to be slightly different from the other. And I have referred to the evidence of Kidero Samuel of Gubenatorial at page 7 of the type proceedings, which I observed are not yet certified, where the court recorded this evidence as follows. I quote you. I can see two IEBC stamps on that. Two agents have signed. for independent and coordinating. The other form has 2 stamps, Yabuya primary, 2 stamps, and 1 agent signed. So the witness was reading out each of the forms. Some have 2 stamps, others have 1 stamp. The same witness, PW4, claimed that some Form 37N were being received and stamped at the tallying center, and that he received 62 out of the 71 forms, Form 37S, but that all the 62 forms that he received were duly stamped. To prove up the hearing of this petition, the petitioners did not isolate any single Form 37A or 37B or 37C or any other essential electoral document from any polling station or the county tallying center which was not signed by the presiding or returning electoral official or not stamped with the IEBC. Even in the case of ballot papers, in the scrutiny report, the Deputy Registrar similarly found and observed that all ballot papers in the 192 polling stations which were subject of the scrutiny recount were stamped at the back, except in 2 polling stations, that is Rapedi Primary School, where 14 ballot papers were stamped, and Dunga Primary School, where 4 ballot boxes were unstamped. And I have put here ballot boxes in parentheses for reasons that ballot boxes are never stamped. I think that to be stamped, where would they be stamped? But that they had their corresponding counterpoints existing. I observed that there is no requirement for stamping or even signing on ballot boxes, and that the Deputy Registrar referring to 4 ballot boxes being unstamped must have, in my view, been referring to the 14 ballot papers and not boxes, considering her earlier statement. I therefore take it that she referred to ballot papers and not ballot boxes. Nonetheless, this court observed that both these 2 polling stations of Rapedi and Dunga primary schools were not among those pleaded by the petitioners to be among the polling stations that had unstamped or unsigned electoral materials or documents. Again, in the two cases of Rapedi and Dunga, it was not shown that the cumulative 18 unstamped ballot papers were cast in favor of the 3rd and 4th respondents hearing. The scrutiny exercise report further reveals that all original, and again I have put in parentheses, all original forms 37S had IEBC stamps, and further that they had signatures of either the presiding officer or the deputy presiding officer. The petitioner's major disagreement with this aspect of the scrutiny report was that, I quote, all the forms scrutinized were either scanned or carbon copies, and that no original Form 37A was available for the exercise, end of quote. In his testimony, DW1, the county returning officer, testified that all original Form 37As were in the custody of the IEBC chairman, and that what Chief Executive Officer, and that not chairman but Chief Executive Officer, and that what they were left with were carbon copies. Further, prior to commencement of the scrutiny exercise, the parties agreed by signing up on how the process would be carried out, and there is no record of the petitioners or their agents faulting reliance on the scanned or carbon copies whose QR codes were duly authenticated to be IEBC documents as per the report filed into this court. The petitioners also filed into court copies of forms at 7S, and they never alleged that those forms were not genuine IEBC form at 7S. The form of a ballot paper for the various elections is as prescribed under Regulation 68, which refers to the templates of ballot papers contained in the schedule to the regulations. I must clarify that clearly Form 37A is not a ballot paper, in respect of which the rubber stamp of IEBC is legally required to be affixed by an election officer, and this court was not shown any written law or regulation or constitutional edict that makes it mandatory and therefore unlawful or irregular for an election official not to stand Form 37N. I nonetheless reiterate that there was no evidence that any of those forms which were filed in court and the ones which were scrutinized lacked signatures or stamps. I'm also aligned with the majority Supreme Court decision in the Rider 2017 case, which overturned the presidential election of August 2017 due to inter alia non-compliance with the electoral law, and because the election was marred by many irregularities, the cumulative effect of which fundamentally and negatively impacted the integrity of the said election. In the Rider 2017 decision, some of the irregularities identified on a massive scale upon scrutiny included reliance on duplicated forms, photocopies of forms, forms not stamped, and I've cited the respective paragraphs of the opinion of the Supreme Court, non-submission of original Form 34C among other documents despite court order, at paragraph 357. The opinion failure to fill in the handover and takeover sections of many Form 34S, thus throwing verification into doubt. Deployment of prescribed forms that either lacked or had different security features. Absence of watermark or serial number on Form 34C, thus rendering it of dubious authenticity and using a certified copy of Form 34C instead of the original. Other findings or revelations in the Rider 2017 case included the returning officer compiling Form 34C, the results using Form 34B rather than 34A as admitted by the IEBC, and based on the cumulative effect of the massive irregularities seen by the Supreme Court, the conclusion, which I have to read, you will read for yourselves. Of election petitions and laid down two new ones. These principles are found in the majority opinion of the court at paragraphs 2011, which I have reproduced, paragraph 372, which I have reproduced, paragraph 373, 3 and 374. The Supreme Court also reiterated and enumerated the principles, again, which I have reproduced. A, not every irregularity, not every infraction of the law is enough to nullify an election. B, the correct approach is for a court of law not only determine whether the election was characterized by irregularities, but whether those irregularities were of such a nature or such a magnitude as to have either affected the result of the election or to have seriously impacted the integrity of the election. And C, to overturn an election, the irregularities must be serious and so negatively impact the integrity of the election and the result thereof that no reasonable tribunal would uphold it. End of quote of that, those summarized principles. The new principles, as enunciated by the Supreme Court, again, I had indicated that the Supreme Court also not only summarized but enunciated new principles. And these new principles are just three, I'll read them, that in determining whether free, fair, and regular elections based on universal suffrage and the free expression of the will of the electors has occurred, Article 38 of the Constitution must be read and applied together with Articles 81 and 86 of the Constitution. For to read Article 38 in a vacuum and disregard other enabling principles, laws, and practices attendant to election is to nurture an illusion of free will. B, in light of Section 83 of the Elections Act, an inquiry about the effect of electoral irregularities and other malpractices become as with the law regarding or relating to an election did not offend the principles laid down in the Constitution or in that law. And C, even where a court has concluded that the election was not conducted in accordance with the principles laid down in the Constitution and the applicable electoral laws, it is good judicial practice for the court to still inquire into the potential effect of any irregularities that may have been noted upon an election. End of those three new principles. Applying the above principles to the present petition, it's my considered opinion that the irregularities identified through the evidence herein and following the scrutiny and recount exercise were not so cumulatively fundamental as to enable this court to make a finding that the free will of the people of Homa Bay was subverted. I reiterate that the scrutiny conducted showed that all from 37S scrutinized were all stamped, and further that the said forms had signatures of either the presiding officer or the deputy presiding officer. Indeed, as noted from the scrutiny exercise, in Rakeli Primary School polling station, 14 ballot papers were unstamped, and in Dunga Primary School, the deputy registrar noted that 4 ballot boxes and have put into brackets were unstamped. However, there is no legal requirement that ballot boxes be stamped, and as observed earlier on, the 2 polling stations had not attracted any complaint from the petitioner, even considering that the 18 unstamped ballot papers were not shown to have been cast in favor of the third and fourth respondents, and even if they had been so cast in favor of the third and fourth respondents, a difference of 14 or 18 votes could not have made a difference. 18 votes could not have made a difference to the petitioner's votes, which were 90,000 less than those, over 90,000 less than those gathered by the third and fourth respondents. In other words, I find that the failure to stamp the 14 ballot papers was not part of the complaint raised by the petitioners, and that in itself did not affect the results of the elections which are impugned by this petition. I conclude by saying that the failure to stamp the forms cannot reshape an election as was held in IEBC, in the case of IEBC versus Stephen Mtinda Mule, 2014 decision, where it was held that there was no special requirement for stamping of forms. In the end, I find that there is no evidence that none of the Form 37S lacked a signature of the presiding or deputy presiding officer or stamp. I am unable to find that the result of the Homa Bay gubernatorial election was unanimous on that ground. Accordingly, I find no evidence that the alleged irregularities, non-compliance, improprieties, mistakes, and omissions under this head as pleaded affected the conduct of the elections and validity of the result of the Homa Bay gubernatorial election held on 9 August 2022. The next issue is whether there was unlawful ejection and denial of entry and access of the petitioner's agents to polling stations and tallying centers, and whether the failure of the petitioner's agents to sign Form 37A and the presence of more agents for one candidate than the other affected the result of the impugned election. That's a bit mouthful. The petitioners pleaded that the agents were unlawfully ejected from polling stations and tallying centers by both presiding officers and agents of the third respondent, as well as the fifth respondent, and thus they did not have the opportunity to oversee the whole electoral process and access or approve the declared result, and were unable to sign Form 37A, and thus there was a doubt as to the credibility of the results therein. The petitioners specified that the agents in the following 14 polling stations were denied access to the said polling stations. That is Mira Primary School, Gary Primary School, Riga Primary School, Atemo Primary School, Dudu Primary School, Osuri Primary School, Kogonda Primary School, Nyasore Primary School, Kirindo Primary School, Wakondo Primary School, Prigu Primary School, Wasalia Primary School, Yagina Fish Banda Polling Station, and Vita Fish Banda Polling Station. The petitioners further pleaded that the chasing away of their agents was to accord the fraudulent IEBC officers acting in complicity with the third respondent agents time and opportunity to staff the ballot boxes and or change the result in favor of the third respondent. To this end, the petitioners called a number of first petitioners' agents as witnesses who testified that they were denied access to the polling stations in the early morning hours due to lack of accreditation badges, but they admitted that they were subsequently allowed into the same polling station after presenting their letters of authorization and oaths of secrecy. PW4 Samuel Obunga Minama, the petitioner's chief agent in West North Ward, testified that he was unable to perform his duties effectively because he was denied access to the polling station right from the first polling station, and that he received calls from his agents from the other polling stations to the effect that they had been denied access because they had no tags as agents. PW10 John Okambo Kisiara, an agent for the petitioners at Single 1 Youth Polytechnic polling station, testified that voting started at 7 a.m. but he was not allowed in because he did not have a tag. PW12 David Obonyo Mireri, the petitioner's chief agent for Kabono School Sub-County, testified that on voting day at 5:30 a.m., agents called saying that they had been disallowed into the polling station and that he subsequently managed to communicate with the returning officer at 8:30 a.m. and their agents were allowed to enter the polling stations. PW13, the chief county agent for the petitioners, testified that on 9th of August 2022 at around 5 a.m., he began receiving calls from constituency chief agents and polling station agents that they had been denied access to the polling stations because they had no badges, and that although the polling stations opened at 6 a.m., his agents were kept waiting for 3 hours, and as a result, the agents were unable to execute their duties, including ensuring their presence when ballot boxes were being opened. In response to the above assertions, the first and second respondents pleaded that pursuant to the regulations 2(1)(c) of the general regulations, an authorized agent could not be excluded from a polling station, and further that pursuant to regulation 62(2) of the same general regulations, only one agent for each candidate or each political party and takes part in that election is allowed in a polling station. The first and second respondents adduced evidence by producing polling station diaries, that is PSDs, showing that the petitioner's agents were admitted into the polling stations, although slightly later than the agents for the third and fourth respondents. DW1 testified that contrary to the allegations by the petitioners that their agents were denied access to the polling stations or admitted late, DW1 produced polling station diaries as exhibits showing the time that the agents were allowed into the polling station. DW1 further testified that as IEBC officials, they facilitated the process of agents' access to the polling stations, despite the fact that the first respondent found that some of the petitioners' agents had no oath of secrecy or official appointment letters from their candidates. There was no agent. There was no agent called by the petitioners from the pleaded polling stations, with emphasis, the pleaded polling stations, who testified to the alleged denial to enter the polling station. Indeed, the agents who testified on behalf of the petitioners, including PW13, the petitioner's chief county agent admitted in their testimonies that the petitioner's agents were eventually let into the polling stations after communication from the county returning officer to the individual presiding officers. The attendance of agents in a polling station is regulated by 24, which provides at sub-regulation 3 that the presiding officer shall not be obliged to admit more than one agent of any political party, candidate, or referendum committee, as the case may be, to the counting venue. This provision gives discretion to the presiding officer to keep order and control of the polling station to facilitate an environment conducive to sound polling electoral business. The regulation empowers the presiding officer to allow only one agent from a party or candidate to avoid overcrowding in the polling station. From the evidence adduced, it's apparent that there was a failure of communication from the second respondent, that is the county returning officer, to his presiding officers regarding the admission of petitioners' agents into the polling stations, as the IEBC did not have or issued badges to all polling agents, claiming that the badges were not enough and that the agents could nonetheless be admitted into the polling stations on production of the oaths of secrecy and appointment letters from their candidates or party. That notwithstanding, it is clear from the evidence of the petitioner's witnesses, specifically PW4, PW10, and PW13, that the petitioner's agents were eventually allowed into the polling stations, as is evident from the polling station diaries, that is the PSDs, produced by DW1, who is the second respondent and who was the IEBC's Homa Bay County returning officer. It would therefore be incorrect to assign blame to the first and second respondents regarding the failure to admit the petitioner's agents into the polling stations, because from the evidence on record, in some cases, the petitioner's agents were allowed into the polling stations even before the said polling stations were open and voting began in their presence. PW3, PW7, and PW8 and PW11 all testify that they reported to their respective polling stations early in the morning and were admitted there as soon as the polling stations were opened. The petitioners further claimed that the failure to admit their agents in the complaint of polling stations afforded the fraudulent IEBC officers opportunity, acting in complicity with the third respondent's agents, time and opportunity to staff the ballot boxes and or change the results in favor of the third respondent. However, from the evidence which I have analyzed, including the report on scrutiny and recount, there was no scintilla of evidence adduced to prove that such failure or delayed permission to allow the petitioner's agents into the specified polling stations afforded the IEBC officials time and opportunity to carry out the fraudulent activities of ballot stuffing and or changing of results in favor of the third respondent. As unexpected, even in the cases of the 18 ballot papers which were found not to have been stamped in the two polling stations of Rapedi and Hunga, the unstamped ballot papers were cast in favor of both the petitioners and the third respondent, hearing hence both were beneficiaries of the omission to stamp the 18 ballot papers. In addition, there was no contest in the final results emanating from the specified polling stations tabled before this court. It follows, therefore, that the petitioners have not proved that the failure to allow the agents into the respective polling stations as early as had been anticipated, and for the reasons given above, was so material as to affect the election results in the said polling stations. The petitioners also complained that their agents were denied the opportunity to sign from 37 A's in the respective polling stations. The legal requirement for our candidates or party agents to sign result declaration forms, that is from 37A, for county government, is provided for in Resolution 79(1), which provides that the presiding officer, the candidate or agents shall sign the declaration in respect of the elections. On the other hand, Regulation 79, Regulation 6, provides that the refusal or failure of a candidate to sign Form 37A shall not by itself invalidate the results announced. However, the existence of this proviso do not lead to total disregard of the role of agents in an election by the first and second respondents and the presiding officers of the respective polling stations. In months from Muyongo, Namoya, Dr. James Domingo Agara, and two others, the High Court in Kisi persuasively held that whereas the court may not nullify an election for failure of a candidate or agent to sign the result declaration form, the failure by a presiding officer to comply with the other requirements constituted a serious breach which requires appropriate explanation by the officer concerned. In John Murumba Party versus Returning Officer Tongaren constituency and two others, the court again persuasively found that although standing of statutory forms by agents or candidates is crucial, failure to do so cannot alone reshape an election unless there are other reasons or factors. Understood in light of the provisions of Regulations 62, 79, and 97, it cannot be said that the mere failure by an agent to be present at a polling station or to sign the statutory forms negates or invalidates the results of an election. Under Regulation 62, Sub-Regulation 2, notwithstanding Sub-Regulation 1, the presiding officer shall admit to the polling station not more than one agent for each candidate or political party. Sub-Regulation 3, the absence of agents shall not invalidate the proceedings at a polling station. Similarly, under Regulation 79, where any candidate or agent refuses or otherwise fails to sign the declaration form, the candidate or agent shall be required to record the reasons for the refusal or failure to sign. For Sub-Regulation 4 of Regulation 79, where a candidate or an agent refuses or fails to record the reasons for refusal or failure to sign the declaration form, the presiding officer shall record the fact of the refusal or failure to sign the declaration form. 5. Where any candidate or agent of a candidate is absent, the presiding officer shall record the fact of their absence. 6. The refusal or failure of a candidate or an agent to sign a declaration form under Sub-Regulation 4 or to record the reasons for their refusal to sign as required under this regulation shall not by itself invalidate the results announced under Sub-Regulation 2N. 7. The absence of a candidate or an agent at the signing of a declaration form or the announcement of results under Sub-Regulation 2 shall not by itself invalidate the results announced. Regulations 97 provide that non-attendance of an agent at any proceeding or act which requires the attendance or attention shall not invalidate the act or proceedings unless the act is unlawfully done. The regulation provides as follows. 97.1. That where in these regulations expression is used requiring, authorizing, or implying that any act is to be done in the presence of candidates or agents, that expression shall be regarded as a reference to the presence of such candidates or agents as may be required or authorized to attend. 2. The mere non-attendance of any candidate or agents at the time and place as contemplated under Regulation 1 shall not, if any, act is otherwise lawfully done, invalidate that act. The law is therefore clear that in the absence of proof of an unlawful act, the mere absence or failure by an agent to sign the results declaration forms without more cannot invalidate the act or proceedings in or at which the agent was required to participate. The scrutiny of Form 37 as carried out by the Deputy Registrar in the presence of parties and their appointed agents, found that all forms were signed by at least one agent, and further that several forms were signed by more than one agent or more agents for all the candidates. There were only 3 candidates in the Homa Bay County federal elections. Besides the scrutiny report, the court had the opportunity to examine the Form 37As that were in court, and it certified itself that they were all signed, and that the scrutiny report just confirmed that. Regarding the issue raised by the petitioners that in some cases the third and fourth respondents had more than one agent in the polling stations, both the first and second respondents, as well as the third and fourth respondents, pleaded and called evidence that the fifth respondent ODM party had candidates vying for all the 6 electoral positions, and that since the fifth respondent ODM party had indicated that it would not be employing agents in all polling stations, each of the candidates vying on the ODM ticket was at liberty to appoint their own agents. From the foregoing, it's evident that indeed some of the petitioners' agents were granted access later on into the polling stations, and further that some of the petitioners' agents failed to sign Form 37A. Some of the agents failed to sign Form 37A. The question is whether these irregularities or failure to sign were material enough to invalidate the results of the elections. As observed, there was no contest raised in the actual vote results emanating from the polling stations specified by the petitioner as having had their agents ejected. And repeat, as earlier observed, there was no contest raised in the actual vote results emanating from the polling stations specified by the petitioner as having had their agents ejected or admitted late, and also allegedly denied the opportunity to sign Form 37N. There is also no evidence adduced to the subtraction of this vote that the petitioner's agents were singled out and unlawfully ejected from the respective polling stations, or that those who were present in those polling stations were denied the opportunity to sign the Form 37Ns. On the allegation that where the agents for the petitioners did not sign, the presiding officers signed for the said agents, I find no evidence of any handwriting expert showing that the presiding officers forged the signatures of the respective agents. There was evidence by DW1, the second respondent, hearing that our presiding officer could ask the polling clerks to write the names of the agents but not to sign for the same agents. And at page 195 of the proceedings, DW1 stated as follows in cross-examination that writing of names at the polling station is an administrative function. The presiding officer can task the clerk to write names but cannot sign on behalf of the agent. I can see PhD for Dutch 02 at pages 10 and 15. I can see names listed, and even if written by the same hand, it's not irregular. Tasks are assigned by the presiding officer. I can see the name of David Ocheng on both page 10 and 15. I can tell if the signature Daniel Ocheng on both pages is different. In the end, I find that the allegations by the petitioners have not been proved on this aspect and are therefore dismissed. The next issue is whether there was bribery and undue influence in the Homa Bay gubernatorial election and whether the same negated the election results as impugned. The petitioners pleaded that there was voter bribery in the following 9 polling stations: Kisui Primary School, Nyakano Primary School, Bolo Polling Station, Ragogo Primary School, Kogonda Osuri Primary School, Omiro Polytechnic, Umai Primary School, and Kodwaj Primary School. The petitioners also pleaded that there was bribery and modifying by the area chief, Mr. Boga and Mr. Kaoto at Wakondo Primary School polling center, as evidenced in the testimony of PW2 Morris Odhiambo Gambi. In cross-examination, PW2 was not able to name anyone who received the money from the said chiefs and further stated that he only knew the chief. PW8 George Ochieng, the petitioner's agent at Nakoma Primary School polling station, testified that he was offered NHS 10,000 bribe by a candidate of the fifth respondent vying for the position of MCA by the name of Gary John, but that PWH refused and that he was informed that other agents had taken a similar bribe. The petitioners further pleaded that the third respondent and her agents, especially her husband, moved all around the county in a motor vehicle with goons, unleashed violence on the petitioner's supporters, and outrightly giving out bribes to induce voters to vote for the third respondent. This was the evidence of PW3 Dixon Homa Aduo. Regarding the alleged undue influence, the petitioners pleaded that voters were unduly influenced to vote for the fifth respondent's candidates in Oseri Primary School and Adongo Primary School polling stations. In response to the above allegations, the third and fourth respondents called DW9 Rosemary Agemo, an agent for the third respondent for Adongo polling station, who testified that she never saw or heard the supporters of the third respondent campaign at her polling station. Now, did she hear the presiding officer telling voters to vote 6 piece? It was her testimony that she never saw anyone being bribed to vote and that no complaints of bribery were raised with her. Article 81E of the Constitution contemplates free and fair elections, which are 1. By secret ballot, 2. Free from violence, intimidation, improper influence, or corruption. 3. Conducted by an independent body. 4. Transparent. And 5. Administered in an impartial, neutral, efficient, accurate, and accountable manner. Bribery is one of the election offenses provided for in the Election Offences Act, number 37 of 2016, under Section 9 of the said Act. The offense of bribery is Section 9 of the said Act provides as follows with regard to the offense of bribery. 1. That a person who during an election period directly or indirectly offers a bribe to influence a voter to 1. Vote or refrain from voting for a particular candidate or political party. 2. Attend or participate in or refrain from attending in any political meeting, march, demonstration, or other event of political nature, or in some other manner lending support to or for a political party or candidate. B. In any manner unlawfully influences the result of an election. C. Directly or indirectly in person or by any person on his behalf in order to induce any other person to agree to be as a candidate or to refrain from becoming a candidate or to withdraw if they have become candidates. 2. A person who during an election period accepts or agrees to accept a bribe that is offered in the circumstances described in subsection 1 commits an offense. A person who commits an offense under this section shall be liable on conviction for a fine not exceeding 2 million shillings or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 years or to both. Bribery is therefore a criminal offense as well as an election offense. The burden of proof lies on that who alleges bribery, and the standard of proof required is that of beyond reasonable doubt. I've already discussed this above. Further, the witness who testify in such cases also matter, and the superior courts give greater weight to non-partisan witnesses than partisan witnesses. A case in mind is that of Frederick Otieno Outa versus Jared Odoyo Keno, where the Court of Appeal stated as follows on this issue. that the offense of bribery ought to have been pleaded clearly with specificity. The third respondent ought to have adduced sufficient evidence to prove that the purpose for distributing the CDF checks was to influence voters to vote for the appellant directly or indirectly. As evidence of the appellant's presence during the exhibition was controverted, the third respondent ought to have provided evidence not emanating from his own agents or even the supporters. The record reveals that most of those who testified were politically inclined to support either of the candidates. End of quote. The Supreme Court have also made a distinction between corrupt acts committed by agents of a candidate and those committed by the candidate personally. In Moses Masika Wetangula versus Musikari Nazi Kombo, the Court of Appeal pronounced that in determining the effect of commission of an election offense, a distinction should be drawn between corrupt acts committed by agents of a candidate and those committed by the candidate himself. The corrupt acts of an agent have to be shown to have had the implied sanction of blessing of the candidate, which would establish a consistent pattern from which a reasonable inference can be drawn that the candidate concerned must have sanctioned the acts. The petitioners in this petition were therefore under duty to prove the allegations of bribery and undue influence beyond reasonable doubt. The testimony of PW2 I observed was not conclusive, as it failed to confirm the person who allegedly received the money alleged to have been paid by the two chiefs, or that the purpose of the money was to influence the voters to vote in favor of the third and fourth respondents. Since the possibility that the said chiefs could have bribed the voters to vote in favor of the petitioners has not been ruled out, the petitioners are required to prove by clear and unequivocal evidence allegations of bribery. In Wilson, Biti, Mbuti, Sabiti, and 5 others, versus Patrick Macau, Kimona, and another persuasive decision by Machakos High Court, and Swahili Abdul Karim versus Mwatele, Adamson Kadenge, and 2 others, again a High Court at Malindi, in election petition at number 1 of 2014. The High Court persuasively stated as follows: that due proof of a single act of bribery or with the knowledge and consent of the candidate or by his agents, however insignificant that act may be, is sufficient to invalidate the election. The judges are not at liberty to weigh its importance, nor can they allow any excuse, such as they can allow in certain conditions in cases of cheating or undue influence by agents. For this reason, clear and unequivocal is required before a case of bribery will be held to have been established. Suspicion is not sufficient, and the confession of a person alleged to have been bribed is not conclusive. Bribery may be implied by the circumstances of the case, and the court is not bound by strict practice applicable to criminal cases, but may act on uncorroborated evidence of an accomplice. A corrupt practice must in all cases be strictly proved. A corrupt motive in the mind of the person bribed is not enough. End of quote. The allegations of bribery and undue influence require clear supportive evidence. The court will therefore reject allegations where those allegations are scanty or where they are based on speculation, suspicion, and guesswork. This is what the court held in Lino versus Sonia and another. There was in this particular petition, there was no evidence adduced to prove the allegation that the third respondent or her agents moved around bribing voters to vote in her favor. The evidence by PWH that he was offered 10,000 Kenya shillings bribe by an MCA candidate buying on an ODM party ticket, which offer he declined, and that he was told that other agents had also been offered bribes is not sufficient evidence to link the third or even the fifth respondent to the alleged bribery. There was also no evidence to show that the first and second respondents were complicit in alleged bribery, or that the MCA candidate who allegedly offered PWA a bribe was acting on behalf of any of the respondents here. This court is therefore not persuaded that the allegation of bribery was proved to the required standard of beyond reasonable doubt. Does not help in terms of weight that their testimony on bribery should be given in light of the Court of Appeal finding in the case of Fred Outa, which I have cited above. On the whole, I find that the petitioners and their witnesses only made allegations without proving any cogent evidence that there was bribery at the polling stations, and therefore I find that the allegations and ingredients of the offense of bribery under Section 9 of the Election Offences Act were not proved to the required standard of beyond reasonable doubt. Regarding allegations of undue influence, the petitioners pleaded that the fifth respondent ODM party, through its leader, Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga, used undue influence to compel the voters in Homa Bay County to vote for the third respondent. The petitioners cited the case where, during the funeral service of the late party Aheda, the fifth respondent's party leader allegedly made remarks to the effect that anyone who did not vote for the third respondent was as stupid as their mother. A video clip was played in court on what transpired at the said funeral service with a translated version thereof. The petitioners also faulted the fifth respondent's party leader, Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga, for campaigning for the third respondent as an incitement, as an incident of him using undue influence, considering the cult-like following that the ODM party leader enjoyed in the county. In response, the fifth respondent pleaded that pursuant to Article 16 and selected Article 7(1)(d) and 11 of the ODM Constitution, it was the duty of the party leader and all members and leaders of the ODM party to campaign for all ODM candidates and any candidate affiliated to the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Coalition Party without prevarication. Undue influence is an election offense prohibited under Section 10 of the Election Offences Act. The section provides that a person who directly or indirectly in person or through another person on his behalf uses or threatens to use any force, violence, including sexual violence, restraint or material, physical or spiritual injury, harmful cultural practices, damage or loss, or any fraudulent device, trick, or deception for the purpose of or on account of, including inducing or compelling a person to vote or not to vote for a particular candidate or political party at an election, inducing or compelling a person to refrain from becoming a candidate or to withdraw if he has become a candidate, or impeding or preventing a person from being nominated as a candidate or from being registered as a voter commits the offense of undue influence. A person who induces, influences, or procures any other person to vote in an election, knowing that the person is not entitled to vote in that election, commits an offense. In addition, Section 63 of the Elections Act prohibits and criminalizes undue influence and provides as follows. 63(1) that a person who directly or indirectly in person or through another person on his behalf uses or threatens to use any force, violence, including sexual violence, restraint or material, physical or spiritual injury, harmful cultural practices, damage or loss of any fraudulent device, trick or deception for the purpose of or on account of inducing or compelling the person to vote or not to vote for a particular candidate or political party at an election, B, impeding or preventing the free exercise of the franchise of a voter. C, inducing or compelling a person to refrain from becoming a candidate or to withdraw if he has become a candidate. Or D, impeding or preventing a person from being nominated as a candidate or being registered as a voter commits the offense of undue influence. 2, a person who induces, influences, or procures any other person to vote in an election knowing that the person is not entitled to vote in that election commits an offense. 3, a person who directly or indirectly by duress or intimidation impedes, prevents, or threatens to impede or prevent a voter from voting, or B, in any manner influences the result of an election commits an offense. 4, a person who directly or indirectly by duress, intimidation, or otherwise compels or induces any voter who has already voted at an election to inform that person or any other person of the name of the candidate or political party for which the voter has voted, or B, to display the ballot paper on which the voter has marked his vote commits an offense. Section 63 of the Elections Act addresses situations where a candidate or his agents resort to specified conduct to induce or impede the free exercise of franchise by a voter. The petitioner's witness, PW5 Moses Onyango Sodom, who was based at Shuriapo Primary School, polling station, testified that the petitioner's agents entitled workers and bought them lunch and paid their fare from home to the polling station and back home on the voting day, a point that was re-emphasized by PW13, who testified that they refunded fare and lunch on the voting day and that the fare depended on the distance traveled by the voters. PW13 Enosh Omwea Bolo, the first petitioner's chief agent for the county, stated as follows in cross-examination at page 154 of the proceedings. I quote him, on voter bribery, I did not communicate to IEBC about it. I did not report any incident of bribery to the police. We were not mobilizing during the campaigns. We had a program. We never distributed cash. We only refunded fare and lunch. Fare dependent on the distance traveled. Maximum was 500 shillings, but a few from far off would be given 4,000 shillings. We gave lunch. End of quote. PW5, on the other hand, stated as follows in his testimony for the examination at page 71 of the proceedings. I quote, I am a voter. I was to entice voters to vote for Mr. Evans Kidero. I was mobilizing before the voting started, but not within the voting stations. I understood fully the rules that after I have voted, I was supposed to leave the polling station. I was appointed as security in Shabumoli. I was to raise alarm to our chief agent in case I see something illegal taking place. End of quote on that part of his testimony. At page 70 of the proceedings, PW5, in introducing his testimony, contained in his affidavit, stated as follows. I quote him, I have come to give evidence on the elections that took place on 9th of August 2022. I was one of the mobilizers and security agents for Dr. Evans Kidero. End of quote. From the above evidence adduced by the petitioner's own chief agent and mobilizer, it is apparent as considered that the petitioners indeed influenced voters by enticing them with fare and lunch on the voting day. Even the testimony of PW10, John Okambo Kisiara of Senior Youth Polytechnic Polling Station, that he saw voting taking place on the 8th of August at Kidero Secondary School, a day before the scheduled election, and that those who were voting were being given 2,000 shillings was not substantiated. From the evidence adduced, I find no credible and believable evidence adduced before this court of any reports made to any presiding officer or to the police of instances of undue influence on the part of any of the respondents herein. The influence of Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga over Kenyan politics is undeniable. and it's in the public domain. However, this cannot be the basis to claim that his campaigning for his party's candidate amounted to undue influence. Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga is entitled under Clause 38 of the Constitution to exercise his constitutional right to campaign for a political party, a candidate, or cause of his choice. The former Prime Minister, as the party leader of ODM, that is the fifth respondent herein, had the right to campaign for the candidate of his choice. Furthermore, he was obligated to campaign for his party's candidates. In my mind, I find no offense or misdemeanor on the part of a party or party leader of a party that sponsors a candidate campaigning for that candidate. In political campaigns, people sell their agenda and they use various ways of persuading the voters. This country is yet to see a situation where a candidate wakes up to goes to the polls to win elections without campaigns unless that candidate was nominated and is unopposed. The petitioner, specifically the first petitioner, testified that after the nomination of the third respondent as the candidate for the governor's position, he decided to resign his membership of the fifth respondent ODM party and vie as an independent candidate. Having done so, and that was in his right and constitutional right, the first petitioner could not have expected the fifth respondent ODM or its party leader, the Right Honorable